Yo, so this happened a couple weeks ago, and it's still messing with my head. It all started with this amazing night planned with my wife, Belle. We were celebrating my promotion at work, and she'd booked us a room at this fancy hotel called the Red Hart. It was going to be a night of dancing, fancy food, and maybe some fun in the bedroom. But then, things took a turn. That night, I turned to Belle as we walked away and said, "I'll see you tomorrow morning." Just one night. It was a cold, calculated statement. I knew what I was doing, I knew what was going to happen next, and I was purposely setting the stage for this whole drama. How could I not? I saw the hurt, the shock, and maybe a little bit of fear in her eyes, and it felt like I had won somehow. My friends were there, laughing it off, like it was no big deal. They had no idea this wasn't just some casual lie. This was a message, a warning. The whole night, Belle was looking at me with this heavy disappointment in her eyes. I'd chosen him over her, on the night I'd promised to spend time with them. Not because I wanted someone else, but because I wanted her to feel betrayed, to feel abandoned. The next day we went to see this therapist, Dr. Connor Campbell. The air in that room was thick with tension the moment I walked in. He greeted me and Belle with this calm but deep voice. "I'm going to play the devil's advocate here," he said, looking directly at Belle. "Do you want to humiliate your husband?" That question felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't expect him to ask that. Belle looked down, her eyes searching the floor. I knew she didn't want to meet my gaze. "No, I wasn't trying to embarrass him," she said, but her voice was not directed at me. "I just wanted him to know I'd be back in the morning." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but the anger was simmering. "That's not what I saw," I said, my voice dry. "When my wife steps out of a car with another man, his arm around her waist. You know what that feels like, right?" Belle was silent. She kept her head down, but I could see the shame in her eyes. "I saw it, and I can't forget it," I continued. "Just once. Belle, try to see it from my point of view. Look at me like I looked at you that night." She looked up, her eyes red and wet. "I thought about you all night," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stayed quiet. Since this whole thing happened, I've been silent, only saying what I have to. In those days, I barely acknowledged her existence. We shared a bed, but we felt worlds apart. Every time she touched me at night, I'd jump up and leave the room. She had no place in our marriage anymore. She'd walked out of that bed, choosing to betray me with him. The therapist Connor, or Dr. Campbell as I called him, just sat there, listening patiently. After Belle was done, he turned to me, his voice soft. "Timothy, it's your turn to speak. How do you feel, and how do you think you can move forward from this?" I scoffed. Move forward from this? I thought to myself. Was he serious? How do you move on from your wife sleeping with another man and then acting like nothing happened? But instead of voicing those bitter thoughts, I simply replied, "You're talking to Mr. Northover." He apologized for mispronouncing my name. But I didn't care anymore. I just wanted this whole thing to be over. I turned to Belle, for the first time saying more than a couple of sentences to her since that night. "If you're going to come back, at least do it at a decent hour. Don't have his flashy sports car rolling down the street at 1 a.m, with him holding the car door for you, and everyone witnessing the whole thing." I stopped, staring at her. "Also, that red dress you were wearing, the one I bought you, you think I didn't notice? You think he didn't mean to drive past all our neighbors so they'd see you getting out of the car?" Belle started crying, tears streaming down her face, but I wasn't paying attention. Everything she said, everything she expressed, just sounded like a broken record. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," I said, my voice cold. "You not only betrayed me, but you paraded it in front of everyone. The whole neighborhood knows about us because of you. And all for what? So you could come back and cry in front of me like it never happened." Belle sobbed, trying to say something, but I wasn't interested in listening anymore. It was my turn now, and I wasn't letting her interrupt. "Just one night, right?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just one night, but it destroyed my whole life." I was at my breaking point, feeling like everything inside me was erupting. All the pent-up anger was pouring out of me like a waterfall, and I couldn't control it anymore. "I couldn't touch the bastard," I said, my voice laced with hatred. "If anything happens to him, I'm the first one the cops are going to call. When they can't find me, they'll move on to her next husband, the guy she cheated with, and so on. Then they'll come back and start from the beginning. So I'm making sure I have an alibi for every minute of every day." I was practically screaming in the silent room, both Belle and Dr. Campbell looking at me in shock. Belle tried to speak, but I ignored her. I had to get it all out. I've got cameras all over the house to prove I didn't do anything. I've got an action cam and a tracker in my car. I even know that there are security cameras at work that capture everyone coming and going, so you see I'm protected 24/7, 365 days a year. All to protect myself, just in case she, or anyone else, decides to accuse me of abusing her or the kids. Belle looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. Timothy, sweetheart, I would never do that. I let out a bitter laugh. And you never thought I'd leave you to hook up with another guy, did you? But you did, I said, my eyes fixed on her. I could see it hit her, shaking her. But I wasn't done. I'd taken enough. If he was going to drop you off at our doorstep, at least do it discreetly. But no, he chose to drive a flashy, loud car, attracting everyone's attention. And you let him parade you in front of everyone. I threw my angry gaze out the window, remembering the humiliations. I can't go out anywhere without people yelling cuck at me. If I want to go for a run, I have to do it at night so no one sees me. And I can't even go to my favorite bar anymore, because I got banned after I spilled a beer on Connor Simpson when he called me a loser. Belle kept her head down, avoiding my gaze, but I just kept unloading. Fred Smith left a nasty note on my desk, and when I confronted him, he shoved me. I punched out his light and got suspended without pay for 2 weeks. I got off easy, probably because I'm the company's best designer, but my chance for promotion went up in smoke. Remember? We celebrated when I got it, but then you went and did this dirty thing. I paused, taking a deep breath, trying to regain some composure, but the rage still simmering inside. And let's not forget Darren Jones. He's not going to be calling me a loser anymore after his teeth get retouched, courtesy of my cricket bat. And, you can always run to the cops or your boyfriend to tell them everything I've done, right? Dr. Campbell tried to interrupt, but I pointed at him, my voice cold. You, the counselor, said it was my turn to talk. So shut up. He fell silent, signaling me to continue, and I wasn't going to hold back. How am I supposed to make things better, Belle? How are you supposed to recover from that night? You could move to a different county, or you could disappear and let me live out the rest of my days alone, paying the mortgage on this house. You'd lose half of everything you've worked for, everything you've studied for, but I'm the one who cheated. I paused, looking into her eyes. Right now I really want to kill you and him and spend the next 25 years in prison. Maybe with good behavior, I'll be out in 15. The only thing stopping me is that I don't want the kids to have a murderer for a father. By now, Belle was crying, but I didn't stop. The kids, Sean got suspended from school for fighting after someone called me a name in front of him. Do you know how hard I had to beg the school to keep him from being expelled? One night of your passion ruined my life, and it ruined theirs too. I hope he was worth it, because now everyone knows you're a cheater. I looked at Belle, my eyes cold. You have to live with that, live with your shame. Belle shook her head, her lips trembling. I won't do it again. I promise I won't. I gave a bitter laugh. Just like you promised to quit all the others, right? Look where that got us. Belle was shaking, sobbing uncontrollably. But I had no feelings left. I turned to Dr. Campbell, my eyes hard. Why am I even bothering to try again with her? The only reason I'm here is for the kids. Belle started speaking. Her voice choked, but she tried to stay calm. I'm sorry, love. Honestly, I didn't see anyone lined up at the ice cream truck. I was just smiling because I was thinking about coming home to you. Last night, even with what happened with him, it wasn't the same as you. He could bring me to the edge, but it wasn't as good as with you. He rolled over and fell asleep right after, leaving me with nothing but shame. I stood there, listening to her words, my heart tearing apart. Belle continued, her eyes still avoiding mine. I know I made a huge mistake, but I love you, Timothy. Will you forgive me? I'll make it up to you for the rest of my life. I've been thinking about things I can do to prove it, and it made me remember all the good times we've had. That's why I was smiling. And I got tested. Belle lowered her voice. I'll have the results this week. Those words felt like another punch to the gut, but I remained still, my face betraying no emotion. Dr. Campbell just sat quietly listening. When Belle finished, he simply nodded. All right, well, it's clear there's a lot to unpack here. Let's schedule another session next week. The therapy session was over, and we stood up. I looked at him, the anger bubbling inside me. And your receptionist is in on this too. She's got a signed photo of him, the bastard Belle slept with. And she turned it around so I could see it clearly. If this is how you treat me, I don't think I'll be back. I strode towards the door, but Dr. Campbell stopped me before Belle could. He opened the door for her, and when it was just me and him, he looked at me with a sympathetic expression. That was unprofessional. I'll deal with it right away. Just be patient with me. I stopped, looking at him. He walked back to the back of the office, switched on a computer monitor, and motioned me closer. For security reasons, we record everything that happens in this office, he said, fast-forwarding through the footage. I saw the receptionist actually did turn the photo around, but I couldn't see clearly who was in it. He frowned, then walked out of the room, me following him to the front desk. Campbell turned the photo back around and looked at it directly. After a moment, he turned to the receptionist. What temp agency did you come from? Mercer's. Why? She asked, confused. Because if you're their standard, I'll never use their services again. You're fired. Pack up your things and leave. She looked shocked but didn't say anything. She silently packed up her things and left the office. Campbell turned back to me, his face serious. I apologize for that incident. It just shows you how serious this situation is. And by the way, he lowered his voice, if the police ask about the incident with Darren Jones, I'll have to keep the doctor-patient confidentiality. I'll tell them I know some things, but I won't volunteer any more information. He held out his hand. This time I took it and shook his, and then I left the office without another word. We arrived at the counseling session in separate cars since Belle went straight from work and I was suspended. After leaving the office, I drove to a riverside far from town. No one here knew me, no one was yelling at me or calling me cuck. The stillness of the water helped me to calm down a little, but the memories of the chain of events leading to this moment kept swirling in my head. I thought back to Wednesday night, 2 weeks ago, when I came home from work. Belle greeted me with a big smile. Honey, to celebrate your promotion, I booked us a room at the Red Hart. A 4-poster bed, we can really go to town. And they have dancing, we're going to have an amazing night. Sounds good, I thought. This was going to be a night to remember. We're back at the hotel, trying to make it for our reservation at this fancy restaurant Belle booked. She goes into the bathroom first, because there wasn't enough room for both of us. We would have taken a shower together, save some water, but there was barely enough space for one person. Anyway, I see her laundry laid out on the bed, looking all sexy and stuff. When I come out of the bathroom, Belle is getting dressed, hair all tied up. She's wearing my favorite long dress. She looked like a hot, bee-stung blonde. I help her zip it up, and I have to admit, I got a little handsy with her back. She just laughed and stuck out her tongue at me. I told her, "You're the most beautiful woman in town, and I love you so much." Belle laughed and took my hand. We walked to the restaurant together, acting like we were newlyweds, enjoying every moment. I even fed her dessert. I couldn't have been happier. But then, things took a turn for the worse. When we get to the dance floor, I see this little dark table in the corner, and I'm heading over there, but Belle pulls me back. She pulls me towards the back of the room, where there's a group of 6 of her friends, mostly hers, not mine. I frowned. It was supposed to be just us, right? Belle gave me a nervous laugh. When Tiara found out about our plans, they invited themselves. I couldn't say no. Don't worry, we won't be there long, I promise. I took a deep breath, the frustration rising inside me. I'd been looking forward to a night just us two, and now I had to share it with her friends. But I tried to make the best of it, danced a few slow ones with Belle, ignoring Tiara's attempts to cut in. All my dances are for you, I said to Belle, trying to keep a smile on my face. As the night was wrapping up, I reached for Belle and smiled. Honey, we have a place to be. She got up and took my hand, and we said goodbye to everyone. Those knowing winks, the little squeezes, the promise of a night just for us. But then he appeared. Leaving so soon, the most beautiful woman in town? Can I have this dance? His voice was confident, almost magnetic. I recognized him vaguely, then instantly. It was Matthew Lennon, the star quarterback for the local championship team. Belle looked at me, a little spark of excitement in her eyes. Just one dance, honey. It's Matthew Lennon, she said like it was no big deal. I clenched my jaw, a wave of discomfort washing over me. But Belle had done so much for me. I couldn't say no. All right, just one dance, but no more. We have plans for the evening. I sat down, trying to act casual, but the uneasy feeling was gnawing at me. Stephen, sitting next to me, offered me a beer, but I declined. Just one dance, I told myself, trying to push down the irritation. Tiara, Belle's best friend, slid into the seat next to me, a mischievous grin on her face. Come on, don't be such a grump. It's just one dance, and it's Matthew Lennon. After all, she said, her voice teasing. I don't care who he is, I said, trying to keep my voice level. He wasn't exactly polite, asking my permission first. He was talking to her like I wasn't even there. What a cocky jerk. Dave, one of the guys, jumped into the conversation. But he's an amazing player, man. We have a shot at the Premier League if he keeps playing like this. I shook my head, more annoyed than ever. I don't care. This is our night. But no one was listening. While we were talking, the dance had changed to a slower one, and when I looked around, they were gone. My heart started pounding. I got up and scanned the dance floor. They were there in the corner, but as I approached, two guys appeared, blocking my path. I guessed they were friends of Matthew's. One of them grabbed my jacket and smirked. Feeling jealous? Sit down, we'll bring her back to you. I knew I couldn't take on both of them, so I turned back to the table, anger boiling inside me. I saw one of Matthew's buddies heading towards Belle and him. Tiara was giving me this knowing smile, like everything was going according to her plan. Another dance went by, and they still hadn't returned. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, determined not to let anyone stop me this time. But as I got up, they were right there in front of me. Belle had her arms around Matthew, his arm around her waist. It felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Belle turned to me, her voice gentle but distant. Just one night, love. I'll be back to you for the rest of our lives. She turned away, but before she left the room, she looked back at me, over her shoulder, and said, I'll see you tomorrow morning. Just one night. I love you. I stood there, frozen, watching her walk away with Matthew. Rage surged through me, and I was about to follow her, but Tiara quickly stepped in front of me, her hand grabbing my arm from behind. Just one night, Timothy. She'll be back, she'll make it up to you. It's Matthew Lennon, after all. I used my elbow and heel to break free from Tiara's grasp, then sprinted through the crowd. Matthew's two buddies blocked my way again. One of them put his hand on my shoulder, trying to console me. Don't worry, she'll be back tomorrow, good as new, I promise. I didn't know the jerk's name, and I didn't believe him. I shoved him, but I lost my balance and stumbled to the floor. Everyone around us just watched, no one helping. I scrambled to my feet, ran through the lobby, but all I saw was the taillights of Matthew's car disappearing from view. I pulled out my phone, trying to call Belle, but her phone was off. No tears, just anger. And then there would be pain, not just for me. I walked back to the table, all of them still sitting there. The atmosphere was thick with tension. An argument was brewing between Stephen and Denise with the rest of the group. When I got there, my face was clearly showing the rage I was feeling. I looked straight at Tiara and said coldly, next time she comes back, tell her it's over. I turned to Edward and Dave, my voice laced with threat. The next time you see me, you better turn around and run like hell, or I'll find the biggest bat I can find and give you both a good thrashing, and stay out of dark alleys. No one said a word. I turned and walked away from the table, not even bothering to look back. Back in the hotel room, I packed up my things, left all of Belle's stuff, and headed home. And that's when I started to cry. Sean and Carrie, our two kids, were at their grandparents' house. We were supposed to pick them up on Sunday night, but everything was different now. The house felt empty, cold. I wandered around the living room all night, my head spinning, wondering what I'd done wrong to make things turn out this way. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I went into the gym in the garage, got on the exercise bike, and pedaled like crazy, like I could outrun the pain. But it didn't work. I moved on to whiskey, hoping a few drinks would numb the feeling. But after a few, I realized it wasn't helping. As dawn started breaking, I went outside, watching the sun rise. It was 4 a.m. I wondered, in all that happened, what had I done wrong? I sat on one of the chairs in the garden and fell asleep. When I woke up, I heard kids playing in the distance. I wandered back into the house, made a coffee, and wondered when she was going to return. But I had a plan, and Belle wasn't going to like it. The ice cream truck jingle drifted in from the street, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was strange to see people lined up for ice cream in the middle of the night. It was 1 a.m. That "see you tomorrow morning," she said, was a blatant lie. I looked out and saw the car pull up. Everyone in line stopped buying ice cream. They all turned to look at the car. He got out, walked around to the door, and gallantly opened it for her. Belle stepped out gracefully in a skin-tight red dress. I realized she needed his hand to get out of the car. It was so low that she couldn't step out on her own without assistance. He kissed her on the cheek, then turned to face the house, grinning like he'd won something big. And Belle, she walked towards the house with a slight smile on her face, walked past the people lined up for the ice cream, ignoring them. Could it get any worse? She got to the front door, no keys in hand. She knocked, but I didn't open it. I just sat there, waiting. After a while, I heard the back door open, and then her footsteps in the living room. She walked towards me, regret in her voice. "I'm sorry, honey, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that." I looked at her, cold and bitter. If it was a mistake, why did it take you until after 1 p.m. to get home? I'm not sure I believe you. I bet you wanted to stay with him longer. Belle yelled, frustration in her voice. And no, I didn't. I was so ashamed I didn't want him to bring me home at all, but I had no money. Everything was at the hotel. I needed to get my head straight after what I did, and he wouldn't take me back until noon. She looked down, her eyes red. I think when he heard me say I'd be home tomorrow morning, he deliberately kept me there so I couldn't leave early. I didn't know where I was. I didn't have money for a cab. I gave her a cold look. Your money's still at the hotel, along with all your clothes. If you want them, you can go get them now. I got up, walked to the changing room to get ready to go for a run. Endorphins might help me clear my head, because clearly the whiskey last night hadn't done the trick. As I walked down the stairs, Belle called out. The hotel knows, they're holding on to my stuff. The anger bubbled inside me, but I didn't say anything. I walked out in silence, and as the door opened, I heard a voice yelling from somewhere. Hey Cucky, how was it last night? I looked around, trying to find where the voice was coming from, but couldn't see anyone. Whoever it was, they'd disappeared into the crowd. It had happened last night, and now the whole town knew. From then on, I pretty much shut myself in. I only went out very early in the morning for runs or worked out at the home gym. Swimming, which I used to do every week, was out of the question now. I spent my time scouring the internet for information on Matthew Lennon, like that would help me deal with this whole situation. I gave in to Belle a little. I even started cooking for her. But other than that, I didn't talk to her unless I had to. The next counseling session with the therapist was the following week. Belle said something that was funny in its bitterness. Even though we were still sharing the same bed to avoid raising any suspicion with the kids, she said, "You won't let me touch you." She was right. I was wearing pajamas, which I never did before, and if she touched me, I'd leave and sleep on the couch. I'd wake up early to go for runs before the kids woke up, trying to keep things normal for them. Belle continued, "The kids aren't stupid. They know something is wrong because you won't talk to me. You play with them, but you ignore me. They've asked why you don't kiss me anymore." I looked at Belle, trying to keep my anger in check. What did you expect? You gave your love to another man. It means you don't love me anymore, so I don't love you either. You're only here for the kids. The anger inside me was still boiling, but I also felt a sense of pain. The truth was, I still loved her, but the trust was broken. I didn't know if I could get over what she'd done, or if I'd always live in fear that she'd do it again. I blurted out, "And how can I trust you? You left me once. How do I know you won't be taking off your underwear and spreading your legs the next time some star athlete shows up? If I forgive you, you'll just do it again." Right then, the doctor turned to me, interrupting my bitter thoughts. "If you don't try to meet Mr. Northover, you'll never know." I gave him the side eye. Why should I risk that? What's going to stop her from doing this again? And I'm going to have to go through this whole pain again. The only reason I'm here is for Sean and Carrie. Dr. Campbell turned to Belle. "Belle, any thoughts?" Belle looked down, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Timothy. I'm so sorry." She looked at her lap, trying to stifle a sob. It was amazing sex, he delivered. But it was just sex, empty, shallow, meaningless. No passion. He just rolled over and went to sleep, and I was left there, drowning in guilt. I realize what I did, and I swear I'll make it up to you. I'll never do it again. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dr. Campbell raised his hand, stopping me. "Please, Timothy, Mr. Northover, let her finish." His voice was calm but firm. Belle stood up, knelt down in front of me, took my hand, and her voice was pleading. I know I said this before at our wedding, and I meant it then. But now I mean it even more. I need your help. I don't know how to say it right. I thought you would forgive me because you love me. We've forgiven each other for so much in the past. But this is different. I know I hurt you. Tears were streaming down her face. But I wasn't feeling sorry for her. The anger was boiling over like a wave crashing. I stood up, helped her back into her seat, and then went back to my chair. I sat down, looked at her, and said, my voice dry and firm, and no. Belle started crying even harder, and I just sat there, my body trembling with rage, trying to hold back my own tears but failing. As I sat there, my fists still clenched tight with anger, a familiar figure appeared beside me. It was the receptionist holding a steaming cup of tea. Here's your tea, it's strong and very hot, she said softly, her eyes tinged with sadness, and I felt like she was on my side. I took the cup, the heat burning my hand, but weirdly the pain felt kind of good, like it was releasing some of the anger that was boiling inside me. I sat there, silently looking at Belle, now sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Campbell sat across from us, not looking happy. Somehow, I felt like Belle was actually being sincere, for the first time in a long time. A few minutes later, we were back to talking about our feelings. I said we were entering a new normal, but I didn't elaborate on what that meant. Dr. Connor glanced at his watch, then turned to me, trying to shift the topic. Timothy, let's talk about Matthew Lennon. What do you think he gets out of this? The moment his name was mentioned, my whole body tightened, the anger simmering inside me. Belle looked down, not daring to meet my eyes. The time I'd spent researching Matthew online hadn't been wasted. I answered immediately, no hesitation. I think he likes to seduce the wives of other men right in front of them. He knows he has his boss backing him up, so he feels safe. This isn't just about hooking up with a beautiful woman. Connor nodded, his eyes focused. Do you think this is the first time he's done this? Have you heard any rumors? I gave a wry smile. The internet is full of rumors and innuendo. I don't know what's true, but after seeing him in action, I'm starting to think some of the rumors might be true. So, who do you think he's seduced? I hesitated. I don't always believe the rumors, but sometimes there's no smoke without fire. I heard he hit on the deputy sheriff's wife, a local congressman's wife, and a few others. Even the mayor's wife was rumored to have been a target. Apparently they got divorced after he resigned. Connor frowned, thinking, so, if that's true, Matthew seems to like to go after women who are powerful, right? Yeah, it seems that way, I said, realizing something I hadn't thought about before. Dr. Campbell looked at me seriously. But if those people used their power to take him down, it would be seen as an abuse of power. What do you think? I suddenly understood what he was saying. Clearly, Matthew didn't just want to steal the wives of powerful men, he wanted to do it in front of them, to defy their authority. Connor continued, so why do you think he went after Belle? She's a beautiful woman, but you're not a powerful man. I don't know, I said, looking directly at Dr. Campbell. But I think you do. If so, I'd like to hear it. He smiled, like he'd been waiting for that question. I think Matthew is tired of conquering powerful men who are physically weak. You, Timothy, are strong, you're physically fit. You're not an athlete, but you're well-built. He wants to challenge a man who's physically strong, and Belle was there, in that sexy red dress you described. You were the perfect target, and of course he felt completely safe with his boss around. Now I understood Matthew better, and I had to admit, I kinda respected Dr. Campbell's insight. He seemed to understand everything, even the dark parts I didn't want to face. The therapy session was over, but Dr. Campbell asked me to stay. Timothy, Mr. Northover, I know you're angry, and I understand why. But I have a few suggestions that might help. Seeing me about to speak, he raised his hand to stop me. Let me finish. I have a friend who's a lawyer. He'll help you speak to the company about losing your promotion because of self-defense. If they condone Fred Smith's behavior, it could get them in legal trouble. He paused, then continued. And I completely agree that if anything happens to Matthew, you're going to be the #1 suspect. You should have an alibi at all times. I have a friend who's a cop. If you want, I can introduce you to him, and he can advise you on how to protect yourself. I nodded, surprised and grateful. This wasn't the help I was expecting, and I was starting to think I'd misjudged Dr. Campbell. Dr. Campbell, I appreciate this. You have my address and phone number. I tried to keep my voice calm, even though I was still hurting. He nodded, smiling, like he understood more than I was saying. Timothy, think about what Belle said. She knows she messed up, and she's trying to make things right. For the first time, Dr. Campbell was talking to me in a friendly tone, using my name like he was talking to a friend. I didn't blame him, because it was what I needed to hear. As we shook hands, he looked at me, his voice reassuring. It's going to be okay, Timothy. The gossip will fade, people will forget, but don't forget it will always be there, in your memory. Someone will bring it up again, when you least expect it. I want to help you prepare for that. His words shone a light on a painful truth about life that I didn't want to face. I stayed silent, nodded, and said, "Thank you, Connor." Leaving the office, I glanced at the new receptionist. I hoped she wasn't as bad as the last one. I almost turned back for another look. There was something familiar about her. But then I shrugged. I had bigger things to worry about. When I got home, I found a package with no address, just my name. Inside was a new cell phone and a short note. Call the first number. I turned the phone on. There were 4 numbers in the contact list, labeled A, B, C, and D. I dialed the first number and someone immediately answered. "Hello, Timothy. This is just a quick call, so you know you're not alone. I'm Albert, and your friends are Bertram, Cuthbert, and Dilbert. If you need anything, call any one of us." Before I could ask anything else, he hung up. It was a short call, but it made me curious and a little bit calmer. 2 days after being suspended without pay following my altercation with Fred Smith, I got a call to return to work. This time I was told to meet with management at 1 p.m. I walked straight into the room, not waiting for an invitation. If they were going to fire me, I wasn't going to be polite about it. The room was full: management, the company lawyer, the head of HR, and a middle-aged man I didn't recognize wearing a sharp suit. The HR manager began, "Timothy, your friend, Mr. Jackson, pointed out that our handling of your self-defense incident with Mr. Smith could expose the company to lawsuits. Moreover, stripping you of your promotion could be viewed as retaliation and condoning harassment. We received complaints from some of your colleagues, and given the current situation, we want to reinstate your promotion. However, the warning will remain, but it will be downgraded to an informal warning. Our lawyer indicated this case is sensitive. But your friend, Mr. Jackson, made it clear that this wouldn't pass the Daily Mail test. How do you feel about that? Oh, and you'll be paid for your time off, while Mr. Smith will be suspended without pay for the next 2 weeks." I couldn't help but think. Connor Campbell told me you might need a little help to put things right. I'm glad I could assist. And by the way, the entire HR department is being required to retake mandatory training with a clear reminder that any such behavior happening again will lead to termination. Do you have a phone? I nodded. Good. If you need anything, call any number on there. We shook hands and he left. Standing there for a moment, I realized I wasn't as alone as I'd felt before. That phone, it felt like a silent lifeline, something I didn't have to speak about. I went home, feeling a sense of disbelief. Just a few days ago, I'd felt lost and angry. Now things felt different, a little bit brighter. As I was putting together some clothes for work the next morning, the doorbell rang. Since the incident with Belle and Matthew, I never answered the door without my cricket bat. I peeked out the window and saw a guy in overalls holding a business card that read Wakefield Securities. I opened the door with the safety chain, cautious. "Can I help you?" "My buddy at the police said you needed security, something about 24/7 alibi proof. Dr. Campbell told him to swing by, but he couldn't make it, so he sent me." I let him in and showed him the security system I had set up. He looked it over. "It's not bad, but it's a little excessive. For instance, cameras in the bathroom and shower are unnecessary. Cameras in the kitchen and bedrooms should be enough to know who comes and goes." I explained that I wanted to keep an eye on Belle, though I didn't say explicitly that I was concerned she might be planting false evidence to frame me. He just nodded, suggesting replacing some cameras with audio surveillance for better monitoring. But I declined. Audio wouldn't be effective in some situations. He added 2 outdoor cameras with better resolution and left. Things started to settle back into a routine at work. But that distance between Belle and me remained, despite my efforts to talk more. I'd still go for runs early in the morning or late at night, when it was dark. The pent-up rage was channeled into punching the heavy bag in the home gym. Betrayal, whether from friends or family, leaves a deep wound. That weekend, the local newspaper ran a story about a car vandalism incident at the golf club. The security footage showed a hooded figure wearing dark clothes opening the trunk of David Brown's car, taking out a golf club, and smashing the windshield to pieces. The car alarm went off, but the figure continued, smashing the entire windshield, even breaking through the metal. Then he slashed all the tires and walked away. The whole thing took 45 seconds. The golf club was completely destroyed. The police were investigating but hadn't found any leads. The golf club immediately stepped up security, deploying guards to patrol the parking lot and adding more lighting and security cameras. As a member of the club, I was sure that the rumors about my incident with Belle at the Red Hart had reached the police. I figured Dave might have pointed them in my direction. And sure enough, 2 police officers in uniform showed up at my door. They were polite, so I invited them in. They asked where I was the night of the vandalism. I shrugged. I might have been home, but I couldn't recall exactly what I'd done the previous week. When they asked about my fight with Mr. Brown, I admitted that we'd had a falling out and were no longer friends. Then I made it clear, "You're going to have to prove my guilt. Don't expect me to prove my innocence." The 2 officers nodded, took notes, and left. The investigation might not be over, but at least I knew I wasn't alone, and I had the support I needed to face whatever was coming next. Just then, Belle walked into the room, still carrying a towel to dry her hands. She saw the 2 officers interviewing me and spoke softly. "He was with me every night this week." Then she glanced at me, gave me a small smile, and left the room. Belle's unexpected intervention threw me off. Since the incident, I'd tried my best to be normal around her for the kids' sake, but the rage flared up every time I remembered what she'd done, making me leave the room regularly to control myself. Each time, that pain pulled me back from the abyss of my emotions, reminding me how difficult it would be to let go of this. That Friday, Belle came home with a furious expression. She stormed up to me, her voice brimming with anger. "The police just pulled me over because my car insurance has lapsed. Why didn't you renew it like you always do?" I chuckled coldly. The chill in my voice didn't leave much to hide. "Why should I do anything for you after what you did to me? You better get used to it," I added, "and you're going to have to pay the fine." Belle just took a deep breath, trying to control herself. "I got a warning, as long as I get home and renew it right away." I shrugged and walked away, not bothering to say anything else. The next counseling session was a roller coaster. He started by asking about our progress and emotions. I admitted I was still struggling with anger but trying to balance my life. I also mentioned that going back to work was helping, not only financially but mentally, giving me a temporary escape from the problems at home. But I remained silent about my plan to leave Belle as soon as Sean was old enough, or when he left home. Belle looked at me for a long time, then sighed. She acknowledged that she saw me trying, but she quickly changed the subject, scolding me with narrowed eyes for not renewing her car insurance, causing her trouble with the police. I responded with a bitter, sarcastic joke, "Maybe they let you off because you're the girlfriend of a local football hero." Belle went quiet, surprise evident in her eyes. It seemed that idea had never crossed her mind. Actually, there were many other things churning in my mind, but I kept them to myself. Those vicious words I'd save for later. As if he couldn't stop himself, I continued, "Maybe those cops are fans. They think he'll take the team to the Premier League. But the more mature people, they definitely don't think that." Dr. Connor looked at me intently, then shifted his gaze to Belle. "How about your family? What did you tell your parents about Timothy not having lunch with them last Sunday?" Belle lowered her head, avoiding eye contact. Her voice was quiet. "Just that we had a disagreement." I didn't say anything more because the kids were there. Then she trailed off, as if remorse had choked off any further explanation, but I knew her answer wasn't the whole truth. Dr. Connor seemed to recognize that too. He just nodded gently. "We'll talk about that later," he said to Belle, his voice warm. I knew she had separate sessions with the doctor to work on her issues too. That counseling session ended on a lighter note. We stood up to leave. Before exiting, Dr. Connor called me back, his voice a little lower. "Timothy, please don't do anything stupid. There are some things we can't protect you from." I was momentarily startled, trying to maintain composure. I mumbled a response, "I'll be careful." But my mind raced with questions. Did he know something, or was he just piecing things together to understand the bigger picture? Leaving the session, I felt like I was entering a new spiral. It wasn't just anger toward Belle, but also a struggle with my own sense of trust, with the unresolved contradictions in my heart. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I decided to confront Belle. "So, you told your parents that we're at odds. Did you tell them why?" She looked up at me, then sighed. "No, I just told them that we disagreed about something. But I didn't go into specifics." I raised an eyebrow, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I bet they sided with you on this one, didn't they?" Belle just nodded, saying nothing more. Her silence irritated me. I continued, "So what? Are you not ashamed of blaming everything on me? Or did you tell them the real reason? That you crossed the line of our marriage?" Belle suddenly shouted, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's right, you think I'm not ashamed. But you think I don't know I messed up?" She grabbed her purse and car keys, then stormed out the door without another word. I heard her car roar off, leaving the room silent. An hour later, Belle returned, her face stained with tears. She looked at me, her voice choked with emotion. "I told my parents everything. I think they're mad at me. Maybe they won't talk to me anymore. And my dad, he's not impressed with you because you didn't fight for me." Seeing her so heartbroken, I felt my own heart soften. I walked over and pulled her into a hug. It was the first time I'd touched Belle since the night everything fell apart. She cried into my arms. But when she tried to hug back, I stopped and gently pushed her away. Belle hung her head and silently walked up to her room, while I went for a run to clear my head of all the mixed emotions swirling inside. Later, I called Belle's parents, telling them I was on my way over. 15 minutes later, I was at their house. It was clear her dad wasn't happy with our situation, but he still opened the door and let me in. As I sat down, I told him everything, from my first counseling session with Dr. Campbell, leaving out no details. By the time I finished, I could see a change in his expression. I made it clear that I hadn't had a chance to fight for Belle. Everything, from her friends to her actions, had put me in a corner. As I stood up to leave, her dad offered to drive me home. We rode in silence the whole way. When we got there, he got out and walked around to my side of the car. He pulled me into a hug. "I'm sorry, son. If there's anything we can do to help, just let us know." I noticed a glint in his eyes before he turned away. After my solo session with Dr. Connor, Belle seemed thoughtful, quieter than usual. Clearly, she was reconsidering things. Saturday came and I went about my usual chores, played ball with the kids, and hit the gym to burn off some energy. I considered going for a beer at a bar outside of town, somewhere few people would recognize me. Even though the whispers had died down, there were still those smirking smiles from folks who knew what happened. Belle said she was taking the kids to my parents' house and would be back later. My parents knew everything and were on my side, but they still loved Belle and were willing to help if needed, understanding that we had to figure this out on our own. Around 1 a.m., the ice cream truck jingle started up again from down the street. The sound no longer evoked happy memories, replaced by bitter ones. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message from Belle. "Please keep an eye out for the ice cream truck." I picked up my phone and typed a curt reply. "No." I honestly didn't understand what she wanted. My phone vibrated again. It was Belle calling. Frustrated, I picked up. "What?" Belle pleaded through tears. "Please do this for me, I beg you." She'd piqued my curiosity. "Fine," I said. But there was no way I was going to stand at the window and watch what was happening. Instead, I turned on the outdoor camera and watched from a distance. The ice cream truck pulled up, a line of people waiting. The front door of the truck swung open and someone stepped out. It was Belle, but not the Belle in the red dress from that night, but a different Belle, wrapped up in a big coat, looking miserable. She knelt down and started crawling toward the house. Around her neck was a sign that read, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Awa." The crowd by the ice cream truck suddenly noticed her, and murmurs erupted. Someone yelled, "Wee ree." Then others started to join in, "Homewrecker, saint." An ice cream cone was thrown at Belle's head, landing in her hair. Belle continued crawling, enduring the insults from the people around her, passing by the very same crowd she had swaggered past with a smile that night. She stopped in front of our door, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. I opened the door, pulled her inside, and then turned to face the crowd. "Let me be clear, if I see anything about this online, I'll go after each and every one of you. Got it?" The crowd started to back away, some smirking but clearly surprised by my bluntness. I helped Belle into the house, got her settled on the couch, and grabbed a towel to wipe her hair and a mug to make her hot tea. She sat there quiet, her eyes still red. I looked at her, my voice steady. "Tell me why." Belle took a deep breath, her eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know. I just felt swept away at the time. A young, handsome, famous guy who was paying attention to me. Out of all the beautiful women there, he chose me. And at that moment, I was certain you'd forgive me. You always have." She looked down at her lap, her hands clenching as if trying to hold back tears. "But I was so wrong. I realized how wrong when I saw you get angry in Connor's office. I saw the shame and the pain I'd caused you. I was standing there, in front of you, and I didn't even notice what was around me." She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry about the kiss on the cheek. He wanted to kiss me on the lips, but I turned my head at the last minute." Belle went silent, then whispered as if talking to herself, "I didn't let him do anything more. I wouldn't let those empty moments taint our marriage any further." Her body shook with each stifled sob. I stayed silent, letting her pour out her heart. "If you want a divorce, I won't stop you. Just let's take care of the kids together. But I want revenge on him. He treated me like a joke, a pawn in his power game. I realized I was just a plaything in his twisted pleasure." Belle's voice dropped, remorse etched on her face. Belle looked at me, her eyes filled with hatred. "I want him to hurt because of what he did to our family." I froze. How did the counselor know his history? Belle pursed her lips, trying to stay composed. "Connor told me. Seducing married women and ruining their lives, that's his game. I was just a target in his sick pleasure. I mean, I'm not even that pretty." She continued, her voice choked with emotion. "Yeah, I went with him that night, but he just passed out. And I stayed there, feeling empty. I knew I'd done something stupid, but I didn't realize until I saw you so angry. I'm sorry, Timothy." I asked, "Then why didn't you just go straight home?" Belle hung her head, whispering, "I was ashamed. I didn't know how to face you. I didn't even know where I was. I got swept up in things, then I ran out of money to get back. You had your phone. You could have called me. I didn't know if you'd even come after what I did." Belle looked up at me, her eyes full of remorse, then lowered her head again. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she just sobbed silently with no words left to say. I saw her remorse. Belle had realized the full consequences of her actions and what she'd done to our family. After a while, I reached out. "Come on, I'll take you upstairs to get cleaned up before we pick up the kids." Belle took my hand, her eyes full of gratitude. "The kids are staying at my parents' tonight," she murmured. I led her up the stairs, slowly like we were trying to step over the obstacles between us. That night, for the first time, I held her in my arms. We lay there in silence, Belle occasionally shivering, sometimes letting out a stifled sob. Forgiveness was starting to seep into my heart, though it wasn't complete. The next morning, the house felt different. Belle silently cleaned, made tea, did laundry, and whenever she passed me, she'd touch my shoulder lightly. I didn't flinch like before, letting her find some comfort in my presence. While I was working on the car, covered in oil, I went upstairs to shower. Coming out of the bathroom, I saw Belle making the bed. As she passed me, she touched my shoulder again. And then, in a flash of something, we locked eyes, letting everything else fade away. We were both naked in bed, holding each other in a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. But just as things were starting, I stopped, saying unconsciously, "We can't." Belle was taken aback. Then, as if understanding, she rushed downstairs, practically flying, then came back up, clutching a piece of paper in her hand, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm clean. I got tested Monday." Belle looked down and whispered, "I don't trust him." I pulled her back to the bed. This time there was nothing holding us back. After weeks of turmoil, we had a few hours of peace, deep, restful sleep. The doorbell rang, shattering the quiet. Belle shot up. "Oh, the kids." She quickly wrapped a robe around herself and ran downstairs. I checked the clock. It was after 5 a.m. It had to be my parents bringing the kids home. I put on my robe and followed. When they saw me and Belle standing together, my mother covered her mouth, emotional. My father smiled knowingly. My mom started to cry, not saying anything else. I awkwardly asked if they wanted tea, but they declined, thankfully. They said the kids had dinner and were playing all day, so they were exhausted. The house wasn't completely peaceful after that, but my anger outbursts became less frequent, and I made an effort to keep them short. Belle still touched me every time she passed by, as if reminding herself of my presence. For the first time, I was almost looking forward to seeing Dr. Connor. It'd be interesting, and I knew I'd get a little more insight into what Belle was thinking now. She'd hinted at it after the ice cream truck incident. When Belle and I walked into Dr. Connor's reception area, I was surprised to recognize the receptionist. It was definitely the woman who had joined in with the verbal abuse of Belle at the ice cream truck that night. I even suspected she was the one who threw the ice cream at Belle. But what I remembered most was that she was one of the few people who didn't pull out their phones to film what was happening. We didn't have to wait long. Dr. Connor called us both into his office, a smile on his face as he saw the shift in our dynamic. For the first time, Belle and I sat side by side on the same couch. The atmosphere today was different, lighter, and less tense than before. Dr. Connor began the session. I sense something has changed since we last met. Belle, would you like to go first? Belle swallowed hard and continued. I wanted to run away from it all, but I forced myself to crawl through the same crowd I walked through confidently last Sunday. The humiliation you felt that day, I'm feeling it now. Dr. Connor turned to me. Timothy, what do you think about this? It must feel somewhat better, right? His second question was like a trap, but I decided to be honest. I'm not sure what to think about it, but I gotta admit, it was a brave thing to do. Belle did that to show she's truly sorry. But I still feel confused. Dr. Connor pressed, why did you stop people from posting it on social media? I hesitated, then answered. I know how bad that kind of shame feels, and even though Belle couldn't stop it from happening to me, I could stop it from happening to her. I didn't want her to go through what I went through. I paused for a moment and asked, who came up with that idea? Dr. Connor explained, from our conversation about the humiliation you experienced, Belle wanted to do something to lessen it. But we soon realized that wasn't possible. So she came up with this idea to make herself endure the same shame as you. She didn't go into specifics, but I know she asked my receptionist for help. That confirmed my suspicions. The receptionist was the same woman I'd seen at the ice cream truck that night. She'd changed her hairstyle so no one would recognize her. Dr. Connor continued. You didn't see this, but after you left, everyone turned on the guy who threw the ice cream at Belle. They thought it was over the top. And your words, are we done yet, seemed to make them stop and think. Dr. Connor then shifted his tone, becoming more somber. Timothy, I asked Belle about this, and she agreed to let me share it. Belle doesn't just want revenge on Matthew Lennon, but also on Edward, David, and their wives for what they did. She didn't realize how serious it was until you first told me. Belle squeezed my hand, her voice tight with emotion. My dad was right, you're always ready to fight for me. And I think, if you'd been able to find me that night, maybe I would have changed my mind. But we'll never know, because they kept you away. Dr. Connor continued, I suspect Belle has already started getting her revenge. But please, don't do anything that could land her in jail. That won't help her. I smiled at him, responding softly, I'll be careful. Belle had said she wanted revenge on Lennon, but hadn't mentioned the others. I had plans of my own, and I was quietly setting things in motion to carry them out. Monday night, Stephen and Denise came over to our house. Stephen apologized for not being more supportive over the past few weeks, saying they should have intervened sooner that fateful night. Denise was in the kitchen making coffee with Belle, but they seemed to be having a longer conversation than anticipated. Stephen sighed and said to me, Denise and I had a falling out with Dave and Tiara. We haven't spoken to them since that night, and we have no plans to reconcile. He continued, I know you like to golf, but you haven't been playing since all this started. How about we go out for a round early in the morning, when no one else is around? I'm not very good, but I can be your caddy. I nodded in agreement, even though I knew I'd be spending most of the time looking for his golf balls. But that was okay, it did make me feel a little better. The next morning, we arrived at the golf course and played a quick round. It felt great to swing a club again after so long. Stephen wasn't very good, but he tried his best, and that made me grateful. As we returned to the clubhouse, Stephen asked me about the upcoming dance and if Belle and I would be joining them. I hesitated, saying I wasn't ready to be mocked again. Stephen put a hand on my shoulder, comforting me. Whenever you're ready. Then he told me that the club had implemented a rule. If anyone said anything insulting to me, they would be reviewed for their membership status. It was supposedly a move to protect me, but it just made me feel a wave of pity washing over me, which was even worse than the initial embarrassment. On the way home, I started thinking more about my revenge plan. If I wanted to pull this off, staying at the golf club would make it easier to access those who betrayed me. But then a bigger question arose, would going to the dance with Belle really be a good idea? She was really eager to go, especially to publicly show affection for me. proving that we were working through this tough time. But I wondered, would forgiving her in front of everyone make me look weak? I decided I needed to talk to Dr. Connor about this. Those guys like Dave, Edward, and their wives would definitely be at the dance, and it would be a chance for me to move forward with my plan. But first, I needed another early morning round of golf to get my game in shape. When I spoke to Dr. Connor, he emphasized that the golf club dance would be the safest place for us to make our public return after the incident. He was persuasive. Later, I called Stephen and asked him if he wanted to play another early morning round of golf. At the time, I heard Belle in the other room talking to Denise on the phone, telling her she'd convinced me to go to the dance. I had no other choice, so I told Stephen that I'd agreed to go that evening. As we played golf, a tiny part of me felt like I was betraying Stephen. He's my friend, but if he knew what I was planning, would he be willing to help? I didn't want to drag him into trouble if things didn't go my way. As we made our way around the course, Stephen told me that Belle had confided in Denise about what I'd been through, from losing my promotion to being banned from the pub and having to maintain a 24/7 alibi. He apologized again for not being there for me more during that difficult time. After our game, I invited Stephen to grab a coffee. I decided that tonight, he wouldn't be paying for any drinks. I excused myself to the bathroom, making sure the screwdriver was still in my pocket. I definitely hadn't forgotten about the need to maintain my alibi. That evening, we headed to the golf club. As expected, Dave, Tiara, Edward, and Jane were there. They came in two separate vehicles, a Tiara X5 and Edward's Overfinch Range Rover. Belle parked right next to Edward's Range Rover. The evening went smoothly. I kept my promise and didn't let Stephen pay for any drinks. I only had a few glasses of wine, carefully maintaining my composure for the next part. After waiting for the perfect opportunity, I slipped out of the fire exit. The bag with the blowtorch I'd stashed away was still there. I put on my gloves, lit the torch, and aimed it at the fuel tank of the X5, then moved on to the Overfinch. The Range Rover would burn faster because it ran on gasoline, and I knew I didn't have much time. After I was done, I quickly came back through the fire exit, closing it behind me without anyone noticing. I returned to Belle and Stephen at the table, feeling a sense of satisfaction rising as I saw Belle smile at me. Just a few minutes later, a loud boom echoed through the room. The whoomph was so loud that everyone around us jumped. People scrambled outside, splitting into two groups. Some ran for the front door, others for the fire exit. Belle grabbed my hand and pulled me out with her. I purposely trailed behind, skillfully resetting the fire exit sensor so no one would notice. The alarm blared as the fire exit opened. Edward's Overfinch Range Rover was engulfed in flames, everyone scrambling to move their vehicles further away. The crowd stood there in stunned silence, watching the fire spread, only realizing it was starting to engulf Tiara's X5. Too late, the X5 was completely ablaze. At that moment, Edward charged toward me, screaming, "You did this, you son of a BTH." He lunged with a fist. I dodged, countered, and my punch landed square in his face. Edward went down. Stephen yelled at me, warning me as Dave came charging in, ready to attack. I punched him straight in the nose. Dave went flying backward, taking Tiara down with him. It happened so fast, but I didn't have time to think about it anymore. We returned to the clubhouse, sat back down at our table, and continued our drinks. Belle pressed close to me, her smile wide, whispering in my ear, "Now that's fun, huh?" I just replied, "It is." A few minutes later, the police arrived to question everyone. Oddly enough, I was the last one questioned. But I could clearly explain where I'd been, what I'd done, and with the security footage, no one could accuse me of doing anything wrong. After reviewing the video, the police concluded that the attacks on Edward and Dave were self-defense. Belle and I got home as the sun rose, things seemingly calm for now, but I knew this was just the beginning of my revenge plan. Life started to return to some semblance of normal, but my anger didn't disappear entirely. During another session with Dr. Connor, he suggested we go back to the Red Heart for a dance night. He believed facing the place where everything began would help me exorcise the demons inside. Belle agreed, and though I was still nervous about Matthew Lennon, Dr. Connor assured me that he wouldn't be back to pursue Belle again. Going back to the Red Heart for a Saturday night dance was a tough decision for me. I loved the Red Heart, great beer, especially around Christmas time with the crackling fireplace and those amazing smoked ham and brie baguettes. But now, I wasn't just there for the beer and food. This was where I had to face the demons inside, and the Red Heart was the arena. I told Dr. Connor I was worried that Matthew Lennon would show up. But he reassured me, saying Matthew never went after the same woman twice. He'd had Belle once, and as Dr. Connor insisted, he wouldn't come back. Belle agreed, saying that we needed to show everyone we were moving on, and if Matthew showed up, she'd completely ignore him. But I was still worried she'd left me once, could it happen again? I decided we'd go. If Belle left with him again, it would be over. But if she came home with me, I'd know it was really over. The demon's gone. Dr. Connor also assured me that there would be people, including him, to protect me if anything happened. That gave me a little more confidence. But a feeling lingered. I felt like I was being set up, like Belle and Dr. Connor had planned this. It was a big gamble, and I wasn't sure if I could trust Dr. Connor completely. I decided to call Albert, a reliable friend. Albert understood my unease and suggested I call Dilbert, who he said would know how to help me. I called Dilbert, and as expected, he launched straight into it with his usual bluntness. "Timothy, I understand why you're worried, but Connor Campbell just wants you to stop looking in the rearview mirror. There will be people there to make sure no one bothers you." That did make me feel a little better. But then Dilbert's next statement really surprised me. "I think you've got your old crew sorted out. I don't think they're going to show up." How did they know so much? We got ready. I was nervous, I can't deny that. Belle, in a high-slit purple dress, looked stunning and alluring. She'd even let her girls roam free, which only added to my nervousness. Everything seemed too perfect, and she was practically bouncing with excitement for the night. She turned to me, smiled, and whispered softly, "Darling, don't worry. This is your chance to prove you're all mine." We arrived at the Red Hart, and things went smoothly. We danced, she held on to me, smiling all night. I felt a little calmer, but I was still on edge. Tonight, things could change quickly, and I'd learned never to let my guard down. As we were about to leave, it happened. Matthew Lennon strode into the room. He scanned the crowd, quickly spotting us, and headed straight for us. The arrogant smirk on his face made me want to punch him. "I'll have your woman again," he said, his eyes challenging. Belle stood next to me, unfazed. "Go on, honey, he's not worth it. He's not that good anyway, he just acts like he is on the field. All flash and no substance." Right then, I knew she wasn't going to leave me. This time she was staying. But Matthew wasn't ready to back down. He scoffed, "Belle, sit down. This is men's business." He glared at me, a sneer playing on his lips, daring me. We were so close I could feel his breath. I saw out of the corner of my eye that people around us were pulling out their phones, ready to record everything. I felt someone's hand on my shoulder and heard a voice. "Simon, buddy." Without thinking, I grabbed his hand and twisted it hard. A crack echoed through the room, accompanied by a loud yell from one of Matthew's teammates. Another one was heading toward me from the left, but I pointed at him without taking my eyes off Matthew. "Stay out of this if you know what's good for you." He hesitated, then Stephen unexpectedly appeared, placed a hand on the guy's shoulder, and pulled him back. I turned back to Matthew. "If you want her, you gotta go through me? But I know you're too weak to do that." His eyes flashed, his anger boiling over. Matthew threw his head back, ready to throw a punch. I anticipated it, ducked, but the blow still grazed my shoulder, burning. I felt another punch aimed for my gut, but we were too close, he couldn't swing hard. I tensed my abs, bracing for the impact. Matthew stumbled back, then suddenly unleashed a kick to my groin. I tried to block it, but his left hook came out of nowhere, sending me crashing to the floor. I saw Matthew take a step back, then swing his left leg, his legendary kick, aiming straight for my junk. Thankfully, I reacted in time, twisted, and took the kick to my thigh. It still hurt like hell, but it wasn't as bad as if he'd hit his target. I looked up, meeting his arrogant gaze. He stood there, grinning, confident and cocky, glancing around to see all the phones filming, then flashing another smug smile. He thought he was a star, but this was exactly what I wanted, public and for everyone to see. As he basked in that confidence, I moved. My left hook connected with his jaw, catching him off guard. All my strength went into the punch, and right after I launched a knee straight into his stomach. Matthew gasped, doubled over, but he didn't go down. Just then, Belle appeared beside me. She raised her knee and delivered a kick straight to his nose. Her high-slit dress didn't hamper her powerful move. But it wasn't enough. Matthew staggered, wobbly, but he still stood. Damn. I had no choice but to drive my shoulder into his chin, and this time he crumpled to the floor like a sack of potatoes. I could hear him whimpering, a pathetic sound compared to his arrogant demeanor earlier. By now, the security guys had rushed over, one of them on the phone. The whole thing had taken less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. I sat down, weary but satisfied. The security guard told me to stay put. I had no reason to move, my mission was complete. Stephen quickly handed me a beer, while Denise stood next to Belle. I looked at them and asked in confusion why. Denise gave a faint smile and squeezed my hand across the table. Sherry, the ex-mayor's wife, and I went to the same school, she explained, as if that explained everything. In a way, maybe it did. The police and an ambulance were called. Soon, a couple of young officers showed up, looking at Matthew, who was curled up on the floor, crying. A brief exchange between them and the security guards. An officer approached me saying, "I'm arresting you for assault and grievous bodily harm." He didn't finish his sentence before another man stepped forward, flashing a badge in their faces. He pointed to Matthew on the floor and said, "No, you're going to arrest that man for assault, grievous bodily harm, and any other charges you can think of. He attacked this man without provocation, and he was only defending himself." The young officer instantly changed his tone. "Yes, sir." The stranger continued, "And you're going to collect the sect from the club, all the videos from the people who were here, including that guy with the professional camera." He pointed to a man standing in the corner with an actual camera, not a phone. The man met my gaze and smiled. I recognized his voice, one of the guys Albert had mentioned. Looking around the room, I noticed our counselor, Dr. Connor, sitting with the receptionist. They looked like siblings. Dr. Connor nodded at me before quietly heading toward a quiet corner of the bar. As the EMTs tended to Matthew, another one came over and checked me out. He said my injuries were just minor scrapes. I suggested he sanitize his fingertips since they'd been on Matthew's face and could be infected. Belle interrupted, "If you don't mind, I'd like to do that myself. It's my job." The EMT smiled and handed her the bandage. As Belle was taking care of me, a reporter from the journal appeared, notepad in hand. "Do you have any comment on what happened?" he asked. Belle looked up, muttering something inaudible. The reporter looked at her, saying, "Excuse me, can you repeat that?" Belle looked straight at him and replied, "The man on the floor isn't worthy of my comment. He's all talk and no action. He's a coward and his performance is just like his game on the field. Flashes of brilliance between all the running around pretending to be good. And you can quote me on that." After things calmed down, Dr. Connor waved us over. He was sitting with the woman I remembered from the ice cream truck incident. Dr. Connor introduced her. "This is my sister Susan." That confirmed what I'd thought. "So, was this all a setup?" I asked, looking around, feeling the orchestration of it all. "Mostly," Dr. Connor admitted. "When I learned about this from your lawyer, a friend of a judge, whose wife Lennon had also seduced, I reached out to Belle to help the two of you. I'm actually a psychiatrist, not a marriage counselor. I hope you don't mind." He went on to explain that Lennon had ruined so many lives, and they had no idea how to take him down until they met us. Belle had no idea about the plan, but they hoped that by publicly exposing Lennon's failure, he would lose his power. Susan, Dr. Connor's sister, chimed in. "I went through the same thing. My husband left me after I had a one-night stand with Lennon. I don't know where he is. I'll do anything to help Lennon's victims and take him down." She burst into tears. Through her tears, Susan recounted her story. "Lennon doesn't just prey on beautiful women, he targets the wives of powerful people. They can't do anything to him because if they retaliate, they'll be accused of abusing their power. Lennon feels safe in the trap he creates. What's scarier is that he doesn't always go for the most attractive women. I've heard rumors about one where he seduced a prince's wife. She wasn't beautiful, a little overweight. She believed he truly liked her, left her husband, and pursued him. But Lennon didn't give her a second thought. She harmed herself and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. Her family tried to hush it up, but whispers got out." Susan choked back a sob, unable to continue. Dr. Connor sat beside her, picking up where she left off. "Lennon always chose people he believed couldn't fight back. First it was the mayor's wife. After the incident, he resigned, a sad loss because he was a good man. Then he got a divorce and moved on. Next was the congressman from the nearby district, and then Susan." Susan hung her head, her shoulders shaking with painful sobs. Dr. Connor continued, his voice soft but heavy. "Susan's husband was the editor of a local newspaper. Unlike the big media conglomerates, local papers always have to please the crowd. Adrian couldn't run a negative story on Lennon because it would be a disgrace to him. When Susan came home that night, Adrian was gone, no note. He vanished and hasn't contacted her since, even though Susan did everything to find him. She hopes that, with today's story, Adrian will realize how wrong he was, and maybe he'll come back or at least let her know he's okay. I sat in silence for a while, then asked, why did Lennon choose Belle? Dr. Connor shook his head. We're not entirely sure, but maybe he was tired of just mental manipulation and wanted to try his hand at physical power. He saw you, a strong guy, and Belle, a beautiful woman, and thought he had a chance. But whatever, Lennon still believed he was safe with his buddies protecting him. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I pondered for a second, then asked bluntly, you guys set this whole thing up tonight, right? Dr. Connor nodded. We did. Actually, Lennon wasn't supposed to be here. We just wanted to get the two of you out in public, enjoying yourselves, to help you guys heal. But as soon as he saw Belle and you, Lennon decided to jump in, completely out of the blue. I let out a sigh. I could have been beaten, so I'm a little concerned about that. Dr. Connor chuckled softly. We had a backup plan. If Lennon was going to go for that third kick, he was going to get taken down immediately. He wasn't supposed to attack first, but the crowd kept his teammates from getting there in time. As you were getting up, we were going to intervene, but I waved it off. I figured you deserved a little closure and some revenge without facing jail time. Even though Lennon's appearance was an unplanned incident, looking at Belle, I felt like everything was okay. Maybe taking him down in front of everyone helped me move on, but I'd wait and see what happened in the morning. Belle and I left the dance, hand in hand, heading for our room. Stephen gave us a huge smile and asked, "Want to play a round of golf tomorrow?" I grinned back. "Sorry, buddy. Think I'll be busy," then squeezed Belle's hand. We didn't make love that night, just held each other and slept. But the next morning was different. We almost missed breakfast. A year after the ice cream truck incident, Belle still kept that Sutton seed potatoes sack on her wall, a reminder of the humiliation she'd endured. But then I decided it was time to take it down. Enough was enough. Oddly enough, the trial went faster than I expected. There were forces I didn't fully understand, but I guess they were in control. I was called as the first witness, having to recount the entire story, from walking into the Red Heart to Lennon's arrest. The hearing lasted over an hour, with many detailed questions. Belle was next. She confirmed everything I said and cried as her questioning ended. Stephen and Denise also testified, both agreeing with my account. What surprised me was the inclusion of witnesses not directly related to the case: the former mayor, his ex-wife, and Susan. Lennon and his lawyer constantly objected, but most of it was overruled. Notably, Belle's knee wasn't mentioned in the trial. Ultimately, Lennon was found guilty on all counts. The trial ended quickly and Lennon received the maximum sentence for aggravated assault, battery, and contempt of court. His football career was over. When his lawyer threatened to appeal, the judge quietly reminded him that it might be a waste of time. As we left the courthouse, a stranger approached and extended his hand. "You still got that phone?" he asked. "Yeah." "Keep it and don't turn it on. We'll contact you if needed. By the way, I'm Egbert." "Thanks, man. You've helped a lot of people find happiness." After the trial, the local paper ran a story exposing the truth about Lennon and his crew without naming victims. The story spread to national media. Lennon's team didn't make the playoffs. In fact, they almost got relegated. As for Susan, Adrian got back in touch with her after learning about her involvement in Lennon's downfall. They are working on fixing things, and it looks like they'll be successful. As for me, this nightmare seemed to be over.